Xtalks connects professionals in the life science, medical device, and food industries with useful content like webinars, job openings, articles, and virtual meetings to help you succeed in your career. This food industry-focused podcast brings together some of our editorial staff to share insights into the latest B2B industry news to help keep you up to date.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Xtalks Food Podcast. I'm Sydney Perlmutter, Senior Food Industry Journalist and Webinar Moderator at Xtalks.com, and this week I'm joined by special guest Matt Brown. Now, Matt is the CEO of Wherefour, a cloud-based enterprise resource planning or ERP platform that helps food and beverage companies, both large and small, solve production and compliance issues. So, Matt, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Sydney. It's great to be here with you.
So can you tell us a bit about your background and what led you to become the CEO of Wherefour?
Sure. So I think in terms of food, I got interested in food pretty early, probably about 7 years old. My parents took a trip to France to visit some distant, relatives. And when they came back, they happened to bring some candies from France that, to me, growing up as a child in Colorado, which at the time, it's changed a lot, but at the time didn't seem to have a lot of variety in products in the stores. These candies just seemed so exotic and just mind-blowing to a 7-year-old. I think that started to kick off my interest in food and different types of food and things around the world and where they come from and how they get there. And that kind of got me going on the food idea. In terms of technology, my father was an engineer, and he was working for a company that would allow them to bring home equipment and on loan and basically mess around with it. So I was exposed to technology at an early age. I think that was kind of unusual. For my era, this was pre-internet, believe it or not. So that was very unusual stuff in the day, and that got me exposed and just kind of experienced, I guess, with understanding technology and so on. I spent most of my career doing consulting for consumer packaged goods companies and eventually got one that was in the cannabis space and started a project to help them build a payment kiosk for a new dispensary in Las Vegas. Through that process, learned all about the compliance and traceability needs of the cannabis industry and got through the project, very complicated project, got through it and realized, the idea of traceability and how it's getting applied in manufacturing is really interesting. I think there's something here. Let's explore this. And when I went out and looked at a lot of the products on the market, I realized they were, tend to be older, been around for decades, not necessarily, modern, and realized there's probably an option in the market for something new. And that was kind of the start of Wherefour.
I love that. Now, why is tech and specifically ERP platforms like Wherefour so crucial for early stage food and beverage startups?
Well, I think one thing I would say is technology feels like the language of business, especially these days. Every business, from the most simple to the most complex, needs to access and use technology. Every business wants to grow, and so knowing and using that technology correctly and effectively to grow is really key. I think for food and beverage companies especially, and this is something I experienced before Wherefour, understanding your product costs, down to the fraction of a penny even, is really key to keeping your cash flow going and smooth in your business. Cash flow, inventory-based businesses have a lot of challenges with managing their cash. If you don't do that effectively, you're not going to grow, or even worse, you're going to hit a cash crunch and really struggle to survive that. So I think that's the number one benefit of an ERP is providing that data to a company so that they don't have to sit down and manually calculate it all the time.
Now, at what stage should a startup consider transitioning from spreadsheets to an ERP platform?
I would say if you can manage everything with one person, that one person knows the business inside and out. Maybe it's a startup. They're doing things on spreadsheets or in a QuickBooks kind of system, and they know all the details. You can really manage your business effectively without an ERP at that stage. Once you start to get multiple people, or you get of size where you've got different facilities, you've got different larger customers to deal with, then I think you probably need to look at some sort of system to help you get through that process. Spreadsheets can do a lot of things, and a lot of food and beverage companies do use spreadsheets. Nothing wrong with that. But they do have some challenges. They can suffer from inaccuracy when somebody messes up a formula accidentally, or people are sharing a spreadsheet and they're kind of crashing over each other to get the right numbers on there. And they also don't tell you what to do and what not to do. A spreadsheet is just a tool, and ERP is actually something that's going to guide you through some sort of process.
So once, a food company has transitioned over to an ERP platform, how can it help solve these production and compliance headaches as it scales?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think production can kind of fall into a couple buckets, maybe. I like to think about it as first bucket or first concept would be, do we have enough material to make our orders? And yes or no, that's a big question for any food and beverage business. Second concept or bucket would be, are we holding too much inventory on hand? If we have too much inventory on hand, we might have too much of our cash tied up in that inventory. If we don't have enough, we might get slammed with orders and not be able to deliver. So that, kind of, it's a fine art, inventory management. There's always that walking that careful line. And I think an ERP or some sort of digital system can help manage that. And then the third bucket is, what stage is everything in the process? So it might be raw material, it might be some sort of work in process, or it might be a finished good. And knowing where that is and kind of what it takes to get it to market is important too. And then in terms of compliance, those I think food and beverage companies experience right away when they first start. Things like, can we pass an audit? Do we have standard operating procedures? And has that plan, food safety plan in place? Do we have limited exposure if something goes wrong or we need to do a recall? These are things that I think every food and beverage company struggles with. Small to big, everybody has to deal with it.
So speaking of some struggles, what are some common challenges that early stage food and beverage startups face when it comes to inventory management?
One would be cash flow management, which I kind of touched on. I think the thing that I worry about for our food and beverage companies, especially the small ones, is that aspect of how much money they've got tied up in inventory and what happens when they need to utilize that cash. So cash flow management and really doing that well is, I would say, is the number one takeaway for a food and beverage company and growing to size. I think keeping track of your inventory, obviously, making sure it doesn't walk out the back door or the front door. Make sure it's in good condition and it's secured and protected. I think if companies don't do this, their customers are generally, especially in food and beverage, generally not very forgiving if a company can't deliver enough product to meet sales. Retailers will move on to something that they can actually deliver and sell. They have high volume, low margin businesses, and they have to move stuff quickly. So, managing that ability to produce product quickly is key. And then I think staffing. just hiring the right people with the right experience can be time consuming and expensive. That's always a challenge in the food and beverage space. So a good electronic system could potentially augment or level up some of the capabilities of the staff you've got and maybe save you a little bit of hiring, at least in the short term.
Okay, so we'll move on to more positive things now. So can you
Yeah.
share sort of an example of how Wherefour has helped a startup sort of master their inventory process?
Yeah, sure. I think some of my favorite stories when I talk to customers are when they have this light bulb moment and they say, I finally know what my product really costs. And that's exciting because they've sometimes struggled a bit to really get a handle on, what exactly does that product cost? I think bakeries have challenges with that because they're doing fresh product every day. A lot of smaller food and beverage companies, they start to do a good product. It starts to sell. The focus is always or tends to be on the product and the marketing and the customer relationship side, and the costing side sometimes suffers in that process. So I love when they're really excited about that, and I just think that's neat to see. Um, I'd say my second favorite scenario is when they go through some sort of audit, like an SQF audit, and they they hit that stage of the audit where, uh, they've got the 3 hour window to do the mock recall, and they let us know how excited they are that they made it through in 20 minutes. And the auditor was kind of going, okay, what do we do now? We've got all this extra time, and everybody is just relieved and thrilled and just happy that they went through the process of getting a system in place. And that is exciting to us, not just me, but to the entire Wherefour team. We just love to hear that.
So how does an ERP platform like Wherefour support regulatory compliance in the food and beverage industry? Because there is a lot.
Yeah, there is. I would say, I think before I answer that directly, I think one distinction I like to make or would like to point out is ERPs come in different stripes and different flavors. There's inventory management ones, really strong in that space. We're a inventory management and traceability system. So compliance is one of our strengths. And the difference would be if you're doing inventory management, you're tracking material as it exists. If you're doing traceability, you're tracking material, but also tracking it as it goes through transformation in some sort of process. And compliance, at least in food and beverage, is a lot about monitoring, evaluating, and recording things as they exist in various stages of the process. So things like food or beverage or even cosmetics or cannabis, chemicals even go through these processes. So we like to think of an ERP as kind of a check and balance on that system. Users need to do things in the right order. They need to record what they did. They need to record where it went. And the system should become a single source of truth. And that helps compliance requirements, whether it's an audit or an inspection or just kind of planning for that. We have proof of who did what and when they did it, and we have ways to enforce standard operating procedures for everything that that product went through.
So thank you for making that distinction. When it comes to food and beverage startups specifically, what should they look for when choosing an ERP platform?
These days, I would say something that works on a mobile device. We see with our customer base, we see a lot of younger users. They prefer to use phones and iPads. A lot of our customers have facilities where they actually use food safe tablets in their operation. So being able to work remotely on the road or on a mobile device is really nice these days, with systems that can do that. If a company is leasing space in multiple locations or the management team is traveling a lot, something that is cloud-based and can be accessed from multiple locations at once is probably a good feature for those kind of businesses. I would say ease of use. Technology and software has changed a lot over the last couple decades. Um, there's no reason to use an interface that's not up to date. So having something that's simple and easy to understand to a wide variety of users, from management to line workers and people with different language capabilities, that's a good feature. And probably something that can handle a high volume of transactions. Company might be small now, but we all want them to grow, and they want to grow. So they need to be able to grow into a system that can handle their volumes when they get there. Appropriate cost would be a good one. Not underpowered and inexpensive, and not overpowered and too expensive for the business. And then a good support team behind it. So there are systems that are more of a DIY, do-it-yourself approach, and other systems that provide guidance and expert advice. Kind of depends on the fit for that kind of business.
Now, I'm guessing Wherefour probably incorporates all of those positive things you mentioned into its platform.
Yes, we do. Yeah, we are. One of the reasons we started Wherefour was we felt like interface, standards and mobile capability especially needed to be addressed in the market. There are other products that do that now too. It's a little less unique than it used to be, but I think one of the things that we believe strongly in, especially for the smaller to mid-sized companies, is having somebody who's going to advise you throughout the process makes a big difference. There are lots of choices to do it yourself, and that can be good if somebody really knows what they're doing. But when you're small and medium size, it's hard to know what you need to know at that stage. So, yeah.
So what are some of the misconceptions about ERP systems that you often encounter?
First one is probably that there's a perfect system out there for me that can do things exactly the way I want to do them in my business. It's surprising sometimes how much variability in manufacturing companies from one to the other there actually is. And everybody has a slightly different twist on how they make their products or how they want to manage inventory. And that can be a challenge sometimes to find that perfect system. I would say, in my experience, it doesn't exist, but I think people always are hopeful that it does. The second one in the ERP market is that they're expensive. And that's true. There is truth to that. They can be. And they certainly seem expensive to most companies at first. And I think one thing to think about when you're looking at the cost of an ERP, it can be intimidating, but you also can remember that it's not just the cost of the product that cost includes, it's the cost of the advice and the consulting along the way through the process to get you from business size A to business size B. And so there's a lot of configuration, a lot of business decisions, some manufacturing decisions. All of these are not made in a vacuum. They're made in a collaborative process. And that is why ERPs tend to be fairly expensive, especially compared to, consumer grade software where you buy it, you set it up and you're done. Those are high volume, low cost businesses. ERPs tend to be very high touch, very team based process to implement, and that adds cost to it. And then I think the other factor that we hear sometimes is it's a little bit of the aspect of, any system is only as good as the data that goes into it. And why do I need to put data in? Or I don't want to put data in today. Why doesn't the system know what I want to do? And that is hard for any system to deal with. You have to, 50% of the challenge is the company coming to the table and doing a consistent data entry and managing their process that way.
Now, what advice would you give to startups that are a bit hesitant about investing in ERP platforms due to these cost concerns you were mentioning?
I would say the decision of when to do it doesn't probably ever get easier. It's just a matter of when you want to do it and when you want to spend the money. The longer you wait, the harder it gets sometimes because you've got more team who have not used an ERP yet. And so you're really training a bigger team and implementing a much more complex business right out of the gate. On the flip side, if you do it too early, um, you might have some of those data entry challenges I mentioned, where you've got 3 people in the company and you don't have enough staff to keep the system current with what's going on, or you don't feel like you have enough time to carve out the required time to deal with setting up a new system and learning it and all that stuff. So there's kind of a sweet spot in there, and it's different for every business. It just really is a factor of where they're at and where they're going and how quickly they want to get there, or how quickly they're getting pushed to get there. One thing to think about is when you get a big customer like a Costco or a Walmart, they're probably going to have some requirements that are going to force you to have some sort of system in place. And doing it under the gun is never a good idea. It's hard on everybody. So if you can avoid that, that'd be a good tip, I think.
So, how do you see the role of ERP platforms evolving in the food and beverage industry over the next 5 years, let's say?
Well, I think a lot of it is going to depend on technology. AI is everywhere now, and there are certainly factors of AI that are going to affect how ERPs work. If you think about more and more inexpensive sensors, cameras everywhere, AI monitoring a production line for efficiency, um, I'm hopeful that those kind of technologies are going to maybe replace the tedium of what humans do, but do not replace the value that humans bring to the table. And I'm also hopeful that technology will help, especially food and beverage, do things like keep food fresher longer. Uh, if we could develop biodegradable plastic or more compostable packaging, wouldn't it be cool if packaging could monitor if the product was going to expire and kind of alert somebody that way? Uh, I've been really excited about some of these ideas of laser tattooing produce where they put lock codes directly on the apple. What if you could do that on a candy bar and it doesn't have to be on the wrapper anymore? What if the wrapper is edible? Yeah, I think there are a lot of cool technologies out there in the food space, and any ERP is going to need to adjust and adapt and support that use. And that's the kind of thing that when we look to the future, we think, wow, this is really, really cool. The one thing I think personally is food and beverage has a lot of traceability compliance requirements. I think every industry, even bolt manufacturer, needs to think about traceability. I think modern supply chain, COVID taught us a lot about the challenges of supply chain logistics. I think tracing things throughout whatever it is, throughout some sort of process, is just going to get more and more uh, required and more common.
Yeah, I was thinking about some studies that I saw that have been going on in the, sustainable packaging space, and you're not far off at all. I mean, these things are really in the works, and I'm just as excited about them as you are. And my last question for you is that can you share any success stories or case studies where Wherefour has made a significant impact on a startup's growth and operations?
Sure. Let's see. So I can think of one company that's frozen pizzas based in Europe. They, during the pandemic, during COVID, they were doing direct to consumer. And post pandemic, they decided they wanted to shift to wholesale and they wanted to expand to the US. Both are kind of big decisions for a business to do. Both are, not super easy to navigate through. We were able to help them expand in the US, set up their wholesale production process, connect all their EDI needs to their different retailers in the US, and got them into the US quickly, effectively, efficiently, and they really made an impact to their business. And that kind of thing just really fires us up. I can think of another company, an ice cream company is this one. They are in one state and wanted to expand, do an outpost in Las Vegas, and have one of their kind of an outpost of one of their main headquarter stores in Vegas, and had to set up whole new staff. Wanted to make sure their process was the same as they do it in their home state. Wanted everything to be able to be tracked and monitored remotely from their other state. And we were able to kind of duplicate their process while tweaking it as we go to fit the Vegas model, which had slightly different business requirements. And they're thrilled. They're able to expand their business, focus less on the technology and on all the myriad other challenges of launching a new business in a whole different state, facility and staffing and licensing and regulations and taxes and all that good stuff. So, if I think our favorite success stories is when somebody says, we were able to focus on those things other than, our production process so much. That is exciting.
Well, thank you so much for joining today. This was an awesome discussion.
Sure. Thank you, Sydney.
All right. Well, that's the end of this episode of the Xtalks Food Podcast. If you like today's show, don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe. Thanks, everyone, and see you next week. Bye.
Thanks for listening to the Xtalks Food Industry Podcast. If you enjoyed our discussions today, please share the episode with your friends and colleagues, and be sure to subscribe in order to be notified when a new episode is released. To join in on the discussion, you can find Xtalks on social media, email podcast@xtalks.com, or comment on the articles directly. Links are in the show description. Take a moment to join our community at xtalks.com to get access to everything we have to offer, including webinars, job listings, virtual meetings, articles, and more. The views and opinions expressed in the podcast are those of the speakers sharing them. They should not be taken as professional advice and do not necessarily reflect the policy or position Honeycomb Worldwide. For further information, email us at podcast@xtalks.com. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next week.